The movie begins with a young boy named Norman Babcock watching a zombie movie. He talks to his grandma, a ghost, and she asks him about the movie. Perry, Norman's dad, screams at him and reminds him to take out the garbage. Norman's grandma asks Norman to tell Perry to turn up the heat in the house because she is cold. Norman walks to the kitchen to take out the garbage, and his dad asks him to be like other kids. He takes it out and asks Perry to turn up the heat because his grandma says so. Perry falls from a chair and tells Norman that grandma is dead and he should stop pretending to talk to her. Norman walks to his room as his parents argue about his behavior, and Perry says he doesn't want Norman to grow up and turn out like his uncle Mr. Prendergast. Meanwhile, Mr. Prendergast stares at a picture of Norman in his house and says there's no time left. He takes some medicine as he coughs, and there are several pictures of Norman in his house. The following morning, Norman's alarm wakes him up, and he prepares for school. He tells his grandma goodbye as he steps out of the house and his sister Courtney mocks him for his strange behavior. Norman talks to several ghosts on his way to school, and the townspeople think he is abnormal. He walks through his town, Blythe Hollow, known for its reputation for killing witches in the old days. Norman arrives at school but gets bullied and pushed to the ground. He gets to his locker and sees that someone wrote "freak" on it. A bully named Alvin walks to him and makes fun of him by telling him to talk to a dead fly. Neil, Norman's best friend, stares at him but gets dragged away by Salma, a smart girl in their class. Norma and his classmates rehearse a drama that depicts how the townspeople killed a witch 300 years ago. While rehearsing, Norman sees that his surroundings are changing, distracting him. Mrs. Hensher, the drama teacher, gets Norman's attention, and he apologizes for getting distracted. Alvin ties Norman to Neil, and they fall to the ground. After school, Norman walks out of school, and Neil meets him. He tells Norman that bullying is part of human nature, and Mr. Prendergast walks to him. He informs Norman he too can see ghosts, and he knows that Norman has seen bad omens and strange faces. He tells Norman that the witch's curse is real, and he has to use his gift of talking to the dead to end the curse. Neil threatens to throw hummus at Mr. Prendergast, and he leaves. Neil asks Norman if he can see ghosts, and Norman tells him he can. Neil takes Norman to his house and asks if he can see his dead dog. They arrive at his house and meet Neil's elder brother, Mitch. They go to the backyard, and Neil tries to play with his dog's ghost. Meanwhile, Mr. Prendergast grabs a book on his table but has a heart attack and dies. Later, the students perform the drama depicting the killing of the witch. Norman has a nightmarish vision where the townspeople chase him through the woods. He screams as Neil asks him if he is okay and falls off the stage. He tries telling the townspeople that the dead are coming, and they make fun of him. Perry and Sandra take Norman home, and Perry grounds him. Sandra tells him his dad is afraid for him, and he walks inside. The following day, Norman sits in a toilet stall, and the objects around him begin to move in strange ways. Mr. Prendergast's soul appears and informs Norman that he is the only one that can stop the witch's curse. He tells Norman that the curse takes effect that night and he'll have to read from a book his dead body is holding. Mr. Prendergast makes Norman promise to stop the curse, and as Norman promises, Mr. Prendergast's spirit is set free and crosses over. The toilet stall explodes and hits Alvin, who is eavesdropping. Norman returns home, and his parents leave the house. Neil arrives, and Norman tells him about the witch's curse. Neil suggests they go and play, and Norman asks him to go home. Norman's grandma appears and tells Norman she hasn't crossed over because she promised to look over him. She informs him that it's alright to be scared as long as it doesn't change who he is. Norman takes her advice and sets off to retrieve the book from Mr. Prendergast's house. Norman bumps into Alvin on his way to the house. He enters the house and finds Mr. Prendergast's body holding the book. Norman struggles but eventually takes the book from his body. He enters the cemetery and goes to the grave of the 5 men and 2 women the witch cursed. He begins reading from the book but realizes that it's a book of fairy tales. Alvin arrives and takes the book from Norman as the sun sets, and a storm forms. The storm resembles the witch, and the cursed men and women are brought back from the dead as zombies. The zombies surround Norman and Alvin, and Norman understands what one of the zombies, Judge Hopkins, says to him. Alvin runs away, and Norman follows him. Meanwhile, Neil watches television as someone presses the doorbell. Mitch opens the door and Courtney, who finds him to be attractive, asks him if he knows where Norman is. Neil goes to the door and tells them that Norman has planned on going to the cemetery. He suggests they search for Norman, and Mitch agrees to help them. Norman and Alvin lock themselves in Mr. Prendergast's house, and Norman wonders what he has to do to stop the curse. He goes through some pictures and realizes he was reading the book in the wrong place. The zombies break into the house, and Norman and Alvin hide. Alvin gets scared as the zombies approach and runs out of the house. Norman follows him and the zombies follow them. Meanwhile, Mitch drives his van while Courtney and Neil sit in the van. Mitch stares at the clouds, and Neil alerts him that he's about to hit someone. Mitch swerves as Neil tells them they almost hit Norman and Alvin. The van eventually hits one of the zombies, and Mitch steps out of the car to see what's happening. Mitch walks to the zombie and holds its head. Norman and Alvin run towards them and tell them to run because the zombies are coming. The head Mitch holds opens its eyes, and Mitch kicks it away as he runs into the van. Courtney asks Norman what's happening, and Alvin informs them that zombies are chasing them. Mitch drives away as Hopkins hangs on to the van. They drive past a police officer, and she begins pursuing them. Courtney blames Norman for their situation, and he informs her he is the only one who can stop the curse. Hopkins breaks a window, and the officer catches up to them. Norman informs the others that they need to find where the witch is buried and calls Salma. She informs them that the witch is buried in an unmarked grave and says they should search the town hall's archives for records of the grave's location. Meanwhile, the zombies enter the town and startle Mrs. Hensher, who runs to the middle of the road. Mitch sees her while driving and swerves out of the road. The van flips multiple times as it goes down a hill and lands in an auto repair shop. Norman and the others get out of the van, and it crumbles. The zombies enter the town and see several people. The townspeople stare at the zombies and decide to attack them. The zombies get surrounded as the townspeople prepare to attack them. Norman and the others run through the town as they make their way to the town hall. Alvin helps them get through the door, and they enter the building. They enter the Hall of Records and realize there are thousands of books to go through. Hopkins enters the town and sees as the zombies are attacked. He calls their attention and makes them follow him to where Norman is. Perry and Sandra arrive at the town with the police officer, and the sheriff informs them that the zombies are trying to eat them. Mrs. Hensher informs the people that she saw the zombies entering the town hall, and they rush to find them. The townspeople arrive at the town hall, and Norman asks the others to continue searching, but they refuse. Courtney says his plan never works and says he should start living in the real world. Norman tells her he never asked for her help and asks everyone to leave. Courtney and the others leave the room and watch as the townspeople try to break in. Norman sits alone and hears a strange noise. He sees the zombies approaching him, and he tries to escape. He climbs to the top of the building and tries reading the stories to the witch. The witch strikes Norman with lightning, and he falls from the ladder. He has a vision as he falls and sees Hopkins and the zombies, who were townspeople, accuse a young girl named Agatha of being a witch. They find her guilty of being a witch and decide to execute her. Agatha begs for her freedom, and as the townspeople surround her, she promises to make them sorry for what they will do to her. Norman wakes up in the archives and sees the zombies staring at them. He asks them why they killed a child, and Hopkins tells him he has to stop the curse. Norman realizes that they read the stories from the book to Agatha so that she will go to sleep for a year. Norman refuses to read the story to her, and Hopkins begs for his help. He acknowledges that he is wrong, and Norman decides to talk to Agatha instead of trying to make her go back to sleep. The townspeople begin burning the town hall, and Courtney and the others hide to avoid getting hit by the falling debris. Norman walks to the door with the zombies, and Courtney watches. The zombies open the door and step out of the building with Norman. He stops the townspeople from attacking the zombies, but they say he is working with the zombies and try to attack him. Courtney and the others walk to Norman and stop the townspeople. They tell them that Norman is trying to save the town with the help of the zombies. The townspeople listen to Courtney and the others, but the storm begins attacking them. Norman makes his dad drive as Hopkins directs them to Agatha's grave. They drive through the city and arrive at the wood's entrance. They walk into the woods, but the trees separate Norman from the rest of his family. He tells them to wait for him and walks to Agatha's grave. Agatha's spirit talks to Norman and tells him she doesn't want to go to sleep. She attacks him with several wooden spikes, and he runs to a glowing tree. Norman sees Agatha, and she strikes him with her lightning. She yells at him to leave her alone, and he refuses as he talks to her and tells her about herself. Agatha refuses to listen as she flies around Norman. Norman continues talking about her, and she begins destroying everything around them. She tells Norman she will make him suffer, and Norman says she's a bully for trying to make others feel the same pain as she did. Agatha slams Norman into a tree multiple times and floats to him. He tells her to stop and walks to her as he tries to make her remember the good parts of her life. Norman grabs her hand, and they appear in a beautiful forest. Agatha tells Norman that her name is Aggie and her mom brought her to the tree. She cries as she remembers her mom, and Norman says people do horrible things when they're scared. Norman tells her he knows how she feels, and they sit under the tree. Agatha rests on Norman's shoulder and crosses over. The zombies shed their skin, and as the people see their ghosts, they fade away. Norman reunites with his family, and his mom hugs him. Norman and his family drive into the town, and Courtney talks to Mitch. He informs her that he has a boyfriend, and she gets sad. Norman sits beside Neil and thanks him for helping him. Later, Norman watches television and Perry tries talking to his grandma. The family joins Norman, and they watch television. The end. Thank you for watching. Check out these other videos and make sure to subscribe and tap the bell to be notified about our latest videos. See you next time.